get me here. Oh, 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 oh.
I'm Emily West, and I'm an Associate Professor of History at the University of Reading, specialising in the history of US slavery. I'm particularly interested in finding out about the lives of enslaved people from their own perspective. So this afternoon, I'm here at the International Slavery Museum in Liverpool to find out more. This exhibit in the Slavery Museum depicts the real horrors of the so-called Middle Passage. This is the transatlantic journey that people who were captured in Africa had to endure in order to get to their new lives as slaves in the Americas. The Middle Passage lasted about 6 weeks, and enslaved people were kept shackled at the bottom of ships as they crossed the Atlantic Ocean. Slavery is particularly important here in the northwest of England, in Liverpool. Enslaved people grew cotton on the plantations of the American South. This cotton's then brought back across the Atlantic Ocean to Liverpool and then on to Manchester, where it's woven into cloth by labourers. Cotton represents an early global economy. Cotton stimulates the Industrial Revolution in the UK. So cotton and the labour of slaves shapes our modern world. About 75% of all enslaved people worked in the fields. They laboured 6.5 days a week outside in the hot sun. They typically worked under an overseer who was ever present with a whip, threatening to punish them if they didn't work hard enough. The remaining 25% of enslaved people worked inside their owners' homes as domestic servants, typically cooks, butlers, cleaners, nursemaids, laundresses. Some historians have thought that the lives of enslaved people who worked inside their owners' houses were easier, but when we listen to enslaved people's testimony, we hear a very different story. Enslaved people typically said that they didn't want to work inside their owners' houses. They didn't want to be at their owner's beck and call every day. And for female slaves, this is particularly important because enslaved women were at risk of sexual assaults at the hands of the white men of plantation households. How do we find out what enslaved people thought about the regime? Luckily for us, many accounts survive from enslaved and formerly enslaved people. For example, Frederick Douglass, who later became an abolitionist himself, managed to escape slavery in 1838 on a ship bound for the north. He later published his autobiography in 1845. Others describe slavery from different perspectives. For example, Solomon Northup, a free black man from New York, was famously kidnapped into slavery, where he endured 12 years of enslavement in Louisiana. There survive about 100 autobiographies written by enslaved people, but most of these are written by men, not women. However, there are a couple of accounts about slavery published by formerly enslaved women, including the autobiography of Harriet Jacobs. Harriet Jacobs managed to escape slavery, and she spent several years hiding in the loft space of her grandmother's house, hiding from her former owner, Dr. Flint, who had sexually assaulted her. Only after living in the loft for 7 years did Harriet manage to escape to the northern states, again on a boat bound for the north. I now entered my 15th year, a sad epoch in the life of a slave girl. My master began to whisper foul words in my ear. Young as I was, I could not remain ignorant of their import. I tried to treat them with indifference or contempt. The master's age, my extreme youth, and the fear that his conduct would be reported to my grandmother made him bear this treatment for many months. He was a crafty man and resorted to many means to accomplish his purpose. Sometimes he had stormy, terrific ways that made his victims tremble. Sometimes he assumed a gentleness that he thought must surely subdue. Of the two, I preferred his stormy moods, although they left me trembling. Harriet Jacobs is of course here describing the sexual assaults she received at the hands of Dr. Flint. Another fantastic resource for finding out about enslaved people's perspectives are the 2,500 interviews with formerly enslaved people undertaken in the 1930s. The Works Progress Administration, or WPA, went out and interviewed thousands of elderly African Americans, asking them what slavery was like, what they remembered about the regime, what the lives of their parents were like, and what sort of work they did. Using WPA evidence, we can find out all sorts of things about the everyday lives of ordinary enslaved people. Studying slavery allows us to track the development of discrimination and racial prejudice in the past. It also allows us to develop empathy and a sense of compassion for people who suffered from racial discrimination, so we can all live in a more inclusive, racially diverse and tolerant world today.